Well, the clock has formally struck 6 p.m., so we are going to get started. My name is Seth Green, and on an evening like this one, I am especially grateful to say that I am the Dean of the Graham School here at the University of Chicago. And one of the jewels of our university, as well as our school, is the Master of Liberal Arts, where students, in partnership with extraordinary and eminent faculty, get to dig into the big ideas of all time across all divisions and units of the university to better understand the world and to live examined lives of purpose. And we have an extraordinary professor currently teaching 2 sections of a class of world wisdom literature, David Wray. And we have 3 superstar students who are in that class. And as we were hearing about how impactful this class has been, we decided, you know what, this is a perfect opportunity to showcase the learning taking place in our classrooms and the incredible students that are on this journey. And so what we are going to be doing over the next hour is taking a look into this class on world wisdom literature led by Professor Wray, and then looking at how it is shaping the leadership and ideas of the students in the class. And so I'm going to take down my screen momentarily because I want you all to be able to enjoy seeing Professor Wray. We're going to start with Professor Wray sharing an opening set of remarks. It's hard to overview a class that is this comprehensive, but he's going to give you a snapshot and glimpse into it. And then after Professor Wray offers that opening snapshot, I'm going to introduce our 3 student panelists for a discussion with them and Professor Wray about how world wisdom literature can enrich our lives. And so after that, just to preview it, you will come to our discussion and we will involve your questions and ideas as well. So get ready to use that chat function. Professor Wray, can I turn it over to you for our opening?
Thank you, Seth. Thanks so much and welcome everybody. It's good to see my students and welcome to everybody who is here visiting. So a few words about this course that I have named World Wisdom Literature. I normally teach a very standard kind of Greek's humanities course, and I've done that for many years in the MLA program.
What is happening?
Hello.
Sorry, we are going to mute other voices, and I assume that is just the big question of the world. You know, what is happening and why? And those are the types of questions we ask in the MLA. So very appropriate. Keep going, David.
Thank you, Seth. So I decided to design a course that was as wide-ranging and broad, sort of over the planet and millennia as I could devise, and bring in a lot of texts about the biggest, broadest questions about life, about mind, about thought, thinking about how to live, and also thinking about how to live. So every week in this course, we read 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 ancient texts from various places in the world. We also read some of the literature in the leadership studies field. So I'm just going to go through the course a little bit, sort of go through the syllabus week by week and talk to you in a very sort of whirlwind tour kind of way about the text that we've read in this course, and show you just a passage or 2 from each of the texts, and talk just a little bit about the kinds of conversations that we've had about them in the class. So the first week we read 2 texts. We read Plato's The Statesman, or the political leader is another way to describe that. It's a Platonic dialogue. If you've read one, it has the standard format of a dialogue between a teacher figure and a student figure, and they are trying to arrive philosophically at a strict definition of what is the statesman, or what is the political leader. And near the end of the dialogue, they hit on this remarkable figure, this remarkable poetic figure of the political leader as a kind of weaver like a textile weaver who weaves together different styles of living that in this text are called more courageous and moderate. We might say something like, like more competitive and cooperative, or maybe aggressive and retiring, something like that. Anyway, let me read this is one of the closing statements in the text. Then let us say that this marks the completion of the fabric, which is the product of the art of statesmanship, the weaving together with regular intertwining of the dispositions of brave and moderate people, when the expertise belonging to the ruler or leader brings their life together in agreement and friendship and makes it common between them, completing the most magnificent and best of all fabrics, and covering with it all the other inhabitants of cities, and holds them together with this twining, and rules and directs without, so far as it belongs to a city, to be happy, falling short of that in any respect. So the idea that one way to think about what it is to lead a community or a group is to do something like weaving. The other text that we read in this first week is called the Instruction of Ptah-hotep, written by a government functionary addressed to a ruler. Most of the injunctions are moral and political in an obvious way, but this is a passage that really struck my students, and it strikes me as well. It's telling a leader that one of the things that is really important to do is to listen to people, and sometimes it's more important to listen to people than it is to be able to give them what they want. Sometimes if you listen to somebody but you can't give them what they want, they actually come away rather more satisfied than if you had cut them off or had simply rejected them. So if you're one who leads, listen calmly to the speech of one who pleads. Don't stop them from purging their body of that thing that they planned to tell. A person in distress wants to pour out their heart more than that their case be won. About someone who stops a plea, one says, why did they reject it? Not all that one pleads for can be granted, but a good hearing soothes the heart. We had a remarkable conversation about this and similar passages in the class. And as you can imagine, it is surprising and striking. The word timeless comes up a lot in class. I have a certain measure of healthy suspicion of this word timeless, because it seems clear to me that all of these texts come to us time-stamped. They all bear the mark of the time and place that they come from. But I get it, what that word is aiming at. This thought that these texts open out and also down into human experience in a way that is relatable to a degree that's very surprising. The next week we read a pair of Roman Stoics, both of whom wrote in Greek. Epictetus, a freed slave, and Marcus Aurelius, one of the Roman emperors. So Stoicism, as you may know, is one of the Hellenistic Greek philosophies of happiness, and its claim, Stoicism's claim, is that the way to achieve the happy life is through virtue alone. In other words, excellence of character and no other considerations. Nothing that is dependent on fortune or chance can affect the happiness of someone who is striving for sagehood. So here's something that Epictetus says. People are disturbed not by things, but by the principles and notions which they form concerning things. Death, for example, is not terrible. Otherwise, it would have appeared so to Socrates. Something that only a philosopher might say, right? Our leader, Socrates, the father of our discipline, wasn't afraid of death, so that's a good reason for us not to be. But the terror consists in our notion of death, that it is terrible. When therefore we are hindered or disturbed or grieved, let us never attribute this to others, but to ourselves. Students were surprised, as you can imagine, that we didn't have to wait until the 20th century to read people inviting us to take responsibility for our own thoughts and our own emotions and the climate of our own mental life. That is, to our own thought patterns. An uninstructed person will lay the fault of their own painful condition on others. Those just starting instruction will lay the fault on themselves, but those who are fully instructed will just call off the business of blaming other people. They won't blame what's going on other people, nor will they blame it on themselves. The other Roman Stoic that we read, Marcus Aurelius, a text that has been translated very, very many times indeed. This is the beginning of book 2. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. They are like this because they can't tell good from bad, but I have seen the beauty of what is good and the ugliness of what is bad, and have recognized that the wrongdoer has a nature related to my own. Right? So you might have thought that the beginning of this text, this was just going to be judging how rotten people are. But in fact, Marcus goes on to make the claim, I want to be ready for people coming at me with the worst. And I also want to acknowledge that all these people who might come at me with the worst are indeed my kin, are indeed related to me. That's an important Stoic doctrine, a doctrine of the relatedness of all beings. Not of the same blood or birth, but of the same mind, and possessing a share of the divine. And so none of them can hurt me. What a claim. Nor can I feel angry at my relatives or hate them, meaning everyone. We're born to work together like feet, hands, and eyes, like the 2 rows of teeth, upper and lower. To obstruct each other is unnatural. To feel anger at someone, to turn your back on them. These are obstructions. From there, we moved eastward into India, into Asia, first South Asia, and we read the Bhagavad Gita, and we marveled at the various forms of yoga that this text teaches: a yoga of action, a yoga of contemplation, and a yoga of devotion. These sentences here are descriptions of the practice of the yogi of action: self-possessed, resolute, act without any thought of results, open to success or failure. This equanimity is yoga. Yoga meaning, a yokedness between one realm and another realm, kind of the absolute realm and the relative. The wise person lets go of all results, whether good or bad, and is focused on the action alone. Yoga is skill in actions. Really remarkable psychological teachings. This is Krishna and Arjuna here on the battlefield. Krishna, who turns out to be the transcendent divine in human form, is the charioteer driving Arjuna out into the battle, which drives Arjuna's life to a kind of dilemma where he's at a point where he says, I can't go on. I don't want to kill. I don't want to fight in a battle where the people on the other side are my teachers, my relatives, and my friends. So he's in a kind of life crisis, and Krishna gives him a transcendent teaching that sort of plops down in the middle of this war epic. We spent a week reading some Buddhist texts. The one that I think touched all of us the most is the Dhammapada, one of the earliest Buddhist texts, and this is the very beginning of it, in a beautiful translation by Gil Fronsdal. More about psychology, more about how to live, by sort of how to arrange my mental furniture, or how to train my mind to be the way that I would like my mind to be. All experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a corrupted mind, and suffering follows as the wagon wheel follows the hoof of the ox. All experience is preceded by mind, led by mind, made by mind. Speak or act with a peaceful mind, and happiness follows like a never departing shadow. Those 2 poetic figures at the end of each stanza are really remarkable, aren't they? The wagon wheel following the hoof of the ox is an image of the suffering brought on, but corrupted. That's maybe not an ideal word. That's the word that Fronsdal chose, but maybe something like disorganized or unskillful, something like that. But then the lightness of the shadow in the second stanza, really remarkable pair of verses. From there, we spent a few weeks in Chinese texts that we just finished up. So first we read the Tao Te Ching, and there we found ourselves talking quite a great deal about leadership, about ruling, about Taoist theories of leading in such a way that it's almost like nothing, and about how much skill and training and preparation it takes to arrive at this sort of nothing doing style of leadership. The loftiest ruler is barely known among those below. Next comes a ruler people love and praise. After that, one they fear, and then one they despise. If you don't stand sincere by your words, how sincere can the people be? Take great care over words, treasure them. And when the hundredfold people see your work succeed in all they do, they'll say it's just occurrence appearing of itself. We spent a week reading Confucius, and most of us were astonished to learn that Confucius is not just about filial piety. Confucius teaches that virtue, or as it's translated here, integrity, has benevolence and care for others, and ritual as a kind of reverent attitude toward other people at the core. Really remarkable, a remarkable ethical and also leadership philosophy. The master said, if you use government to show people the way and punishment to keep them true, the people will grow evasive and lose all remorse. But if you use integrity, meaning virtue, to show them the way, and if you use ritual to keep them true, they'll cultivate remorse and always see deeply into things. And in another passage, the master said, in government, the secret is integrity. Use it and you'll be like the pole star, always dwelling in its proper place, the other stars turning reverently about it. So Confucius shares with Aristotle and some other Greek thinkers this thought of ethical excellence as something that is charismatic, attractive, like a shining star that draws people to it, that magnetizes people. We had to spend a week reading The Art of War, right? This being a course about texts that have been taken as leadership handbooks. It was the one that, frankly, we found the least to have the least application, but it is a remarkable book, especially for its Taoist bent. So here's a moment that is especially Taoist in The Art of War. The formation of troops is like water. Just as water's flow avoids the high ground and rushes to the low, so likewise the victor avoids the enemy's strong points and strikes where the enemy is weak. As water's flow follows the forms of the land, so likewise the winning army varies its tactics, adjusting to the enemy's formations. And we just finished discussing Zhuangzi, the second great Taoist text that we read. Zhuangzi is full of anecdotes that are often highly amusing, entertaining. A lot of them are sort of like a brain massage, sort of passing from one language mode to another language mode, sometimes skeptical, sometimes mystical, sometimes paradoxical. So here's a skeptical sort of deconstruction of the foolishness of getting into that which is called an argument, that rather absurd social performance where we each say to the other person, I'm right and you're wrong. So suppose you and I have an argument. Suppose you win and I lose. Does that mean you're really right and I'm wrong? Well, suppose I win and you lose. Does that mean I'm really right and you're wrong? Is one of us right and the other wrong? Are we both right and both wrong? If we can't figure it out ourselves, others must be totally in the dark. So who could we get to settle it? Well, we could get somebody who agrees with you, but if they agree with you, how could they decide who's right and wrong? We could get somebody who agrees with me, but if they agree with me, how could they decide? We could get someone who disagrees with both of us, but if they disagree with both of us, how could they decide? We could get somebody who agrees with both of us, but if they agree with both of us, how could they decide? Not I, nor you, nor anyone else can know who is right and who wrong. So what do we do? Wait for someone else to come along who can decide? So Zhuangzi is playing with us very hard there and inviting us to see the absurdity of that situation. Next up, and we'll read this next week, is this astonishing Mayan precious scripture that was preserved because it was written down in the 16th century. It includes a creation narrative, but so much more. It's a kind of mythological treasure trove. This is the opening passage of this text. This is the beginning of the ancient word here in this place called Quiche. Here we shall inscribe, we shall implant the ancient word, the potential and source for everything done in the citadel of Quiche, in the nation of Quiche people. And then for the final week, we're going to read a sort of more modern, familiar, more obviously foundational text about ethics and leadership. This passage that I'm going to read here from John Stuart Mill, from Utilitarianism, seems especially appropriate to me because, as you may know, the extension mission of the University of Chicago dates all the way back to the founding of the university, and it was part of that great 19th century democratization of culture, that gave us not just the University of Chicago, not just our museums and our symphony hall, but similar institutions all around the country and in so many places in the world, based on this thought that the highest culture ought to be made available to everyone. These two prime requirements of happiness, mental cultivation and unselfishness, should not be thought of as possible only for a lucky few. There is absolutely no reason in the nature of things why an amount of mental culture sufficient to give an intelligent interest in science, poetry, art, history, and so on should not be the inheritance of everyone born in a civilized country, any more than there is any inherent necessity that any human being should be a selfish egotist whose only feelings and cares are ones that center on his own miserable individuality. What a remarkable comparison, right? Mill is saying, just as you don't have to be a selfish egotist. Likewise, cultures don't have to be begrudging of the highest, of the most universal access to knowledge and culture. So with that, you have a little bit of the flavor of the course. I'll mention again that every week alongside the texts, we're reading something from the field of leadership studies with a direct application to the texts that we're reading. But I'll also add that we don't prioritize, nor do we instrumentalize these texts to turn them into like merely leadership handbooks. The thought here is that by reading these texts and discussing them in the keenest critical way possible, that's the way that we're most likely to get at what these texts might have to offer us in response to questions about how to live and how to lead.
Well, David, let me just say that was an extraordinary whirlwind. I mean, the way that you're able to bring texts across thousands of years together and show that these current conversations we have are rooted in conversations that have been across time and space is extraordinary. And what's striking about what you just said is I remember my own liberal arts education, and in every leadership experience I've had, I've thought back to John Stuart Mill and to Locke and to all of these other, and they weren't ever in a leadership course for me, but we were talking about what our values and ethics and human connections are. And ultimately, those are the ingredients of leadership and what makes great leaders. So it's striking now to think about how people in class could actually be looking at this for literature and with an ethical mindset, but ultimately informing their leadership accordingly. And we have 3 students that, as you know, are in your class and are actually going through that learning journey right now. And so let me bring them into this discussion. Cara Brennan Alamano is the Chief People Officer at Lattice. Daniel Costello is an educator and administrator. And David Allen Maxson is the head of HR and medical affairs for the 310th Expeditionary Sustainment Command. And I want to get started because we did share your bios on the event website, but if each of you could just give kind of the 45, 60-second snapshot of your background, and then tell why you decided to take this class. And then we're going to journey into the learning experience. And Cara, can we start with you?
Yeah, thank you so much. And just spending the last few minutes hearing David talk, Daniel and David, you probably feel the same way. It's very similar to how we spend our Wednesday nights, or at least how we have for the past 6 or 7 weeks. I'm Cara Brennan Alamano. As mentioned, I work as a Chief People Officer. My career has spanned a bit over 20 years. And I work in high growth technology companies for the past 15 of those. I help on the people side of business. So I lead the talent functions that help drive the growth and success of the technology companies I've been a part of. And my last few were Pinterest, Planet Labs, and Udemy before I came here to Lattice. And the reason I'm taking this course is world wisdom literature is a part of my work toward the Master of Liberal Arts, and I have a focus area in ethics and leadership. And just foundationally, I had a lot of new experiences during the pandemic and some of the social justice movements of the past few years, and the work that I've done to take my companies through initial public offerings. And what I'm finding is the future of work is now. Many things have changed, and in order for me to be a really good leader, I want to make sure that I'm continuing to learn and grow. And it helps me with my critical thinking capabilities to go back to people like Marcus Aurelius and read the Dhammapada and these timeless perspectives on how to make sure people have their best experiences, particularly in the work that they do. So has been really rewarding and great to also share this with David and Daniel as students as well.
Daniel, can we come to you next?
Thank you. I'm Daniel Costello, and I'm an educator. I've taught religious studies for many years, and in between signing up for this class and now being enrolled in this class, I was given an administrator role at my home institution. And so I've been thinking quite a bit about leadership these days, and it's been refreshing to take this course and to think through some of those matters. I found this course very appealing to me because I've worked through various features of the Western canon of literature, Western canon of philosophy, and I was just interested to see other voices and other texts. That's originally what intrigued me about this course, and it has been a blast. I have just enjoyed it very much with the range of texts that we've read, the various conversations that we've had among us as students, and the ones facilitated by Professor Wray. And it's just been a wonderful experience that has surpassed my expectations.
And David, our final introduction. Oh, David Allen Matheson, I meant, just to be sure. But you're on mute though. Let's see. Well, okay, so sorry. I think that was on me. Now you should be able to unmute. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
No, that was on me. Just for anyone wondering, the technology snafu, I had said do not allow people to unmute earlier accidentally. So please go ahead, David. My apologies.
So as a group know about me, I have about 20 years of leadership experience, both in the military and also in corporate. But the reason I took this class was the fact that we study from the time at West Point, where I graduated from almost 20 years ago, leadership. There's a touch point on Sun Tzu, there's a touch point on Confucius, and there's a touch point on an array of leaders like Marcus Aurelius and so forth. However, we don't go as deep into those leadership attributes of those fine thinkers over the course of history, and the connections we make across the breadth and span of the continuum of human history. So for me, coming to this course was more trying to get back to those basics, but also having a more expansive understanding of what leadership is and what these thinkers thought before we thought about these things 2,000 years ago. So for me, and for just listening to David, Kara, and Daniel, it's always about learning something new. And I know David covered a point about filial piety. I was a student who brought up the issue about, I didn't know Confucius only talk more than just about filial piety. It's about virtue leadership. And in the military, virtue leadership, servant leadership, and accountability and living with integrity is something that's a cornerstone of how we operate. So I can now see the trace back from ancient history to current modern times based on the learnings we've taken through this course. And I know the 81 folks who've seen this this presentation by David have a better understanding of the connective tissue between 2000 and now 2023, that we are one continuing human endeavor based on the shoulders of great giant thinkers and current thinkers. Thank you, David. And thank you, Seth.
Thank you. And Professor, I want to come back to you now and begin kind of into this, how does literature influence leadership question? I'm going to come to the panelists in a moment. You're a classics professor, so you're usually in Hellenistic and Roman poetry and Greek epics. And you decided to survey across wisdom literature. And then you even have some conversations about applications to leadership in the course. And I'm curious kind of how you endeavored, as you were thinking about this, to connect these texts to leadership conversations. And the point you made earlier began to get there, where you were saying that this is not about leadership development per se. This isn't a business leadership class, but at the same time, you are thinking about how these inform how we lead. So I'm curious just if you could talk a little bit about getting that balance right, about treating these texts as, in their period of time, in their own way, as unique, but then also reflecting and connecting them to current practice.
What a wonderful question. I love that. It reminds me of something that I was recently saying to some junior faculty, and their eyes widened a little bit with fear when I said this. What I said was, I always teach in such a way that I depend on my students. In other words, I come into the class, and if my students don't bring it, the class is going to tank. I am dependent on the students. That works because this is the University of Chicago. That doesn't work just anywhere. But I think that's really crucially important. So we read with charity, a charitable attitude and a critical attitude. Whether we're reading the Analects of Confucius, or whether we're reading some leadership studies, essay about applying the Analects of Confucius to leadership. The students and I do our best job to understand the argument that the author is making, and only then after that to evaluate it both charitably and also critically. So in other words, we do the same thing that we would be doing if we were reading the Odyssey and the Nicomachean Ethics. It's just that we're reading a far broader base, and the kinds of applications and the connections that these students are making have turned out really far beyond my expectations. So it's been such a pleasure to teach the course.
Well, I know one element that is unique in the MLA classroom compared to other graduate programs is that the students are typically bringing, and this is true here, decades of life experience. And so as they're reading these texts, they're in their minds thinking about moments where maybe they let someone plead out their heart, and it actually led them to connect even when they couldn't satisfy them winning the argument. And so I'm curious now, Kara, Daniel, and David, come to you. and ask, how have these texts helped you to reflect and maybe even shape your leadership? And is there one text that maybe has stood out so far for each of you that may be guiding you in a way that you hadn't anticipated as you entered? And Tara, maybe we can start again with you.
It's really nice in this time where I spend my days very busy and very focused to be able to take some time to self-reflect. And I think anyone in any kind of leadership role in any kind of company can understand the importance and the value of that. It's changed how I've shown up for my team differently. I find it's good to be in a place where we're asking some of those deeper questions. And so I think I'm doing a better job of asking questions of my team. And specifically, I'm writing my paper and doing some additional work on Marcus Aurelius, and I'm digging into the Stoics, and it's really cool. It's really interesting. There's so much there. And I found, again, that's bleeding over into the work that I'm doing. And it also helps me feel more purposeful in the work that I'm doing, because I'm able to see that I'm developing myself and not just solely focused on developing my team members.
Daniel?
I mentioned I've transitioned also to an administrative role now. And so I've been actively thinking about, well, what is my leadership style? And reading these texts have helped me with that, which has been an important step for me, because I've always been suspicious of leadership studies as a genre, just because I found that it's always very driven by principles and results, at least the exposure that I've had. And so reading these texts and seeing that there are different options and different ways of imagining what a leader can look like. And I really, in particular, enjoyed the texts that we read in Taoism, and the emphasis at times of what Professor Wray mentioned about actionless action, or doing nothing, or Wu Wei, this sense of letting things develop and not imposing yourself necessarily so much, because there's a value in those texts and that approach, that in imposing yourself, imposing your will, even if you're trying to help, you could actually make things worse by destroying the fragility that's there in a particular organization or situation. So just the process of finding my own leadership style and seeing and being given the permission to live into my own sensibilities and having some ancient authors guiding me along has been very fruitful for me.
David?
I think for me, I really appreciate Marcus Aurelius. He's a former general, one of the great 5 emperors of Rome, and he talked about stoicism. But one of the points we really covered was being yourself. Marcus Aurelius really stressed that point: being yourself and being true to yourself. And it's strange from the fact that a senior great leader of his eminence had the mentality, the fact that to truly actualize your life, you got to be yourself. You can't be anyone else. And that's a lesson that's taught in leadership through the ages. It's a lesson that I found very helpful in the military when I've carved my path in my journey. The fact that I want to be true to who I am. I can't be anyone else but me. And the fact that an ancient leader had that kind of mindset to me is mind-blowing. Also, the fact that we were working on our final paper for World of Wisdom, and I normally, when I'm with my eldest daughter, we're traveling a lot, and we have these conversations about servant leadership, how to, work on behalf of others and so forth. And this course has actually forced me to sit down and write those lessons out as part of my final paper. And so I can pass on to my daughter, like, hey, these are part of the conversations we had over the course of your 18 years. And I'll also have those conversations with my younger daughters. But I want to say these philosophers have really got me thinking about my own life, my own existence, but how I'm going to impact my children, how my children will impact others, and how we can just impact humanity in general. Because if we're only in this for ourselves, that is the wrong idea for life. We got to be in this for others, because that is truly what it means to be a human. And we spoke about that yesterday, about human nature in Zhuangzi. So The fact that these philosophers from 2,000, 5,000 years ago had these ideas already in their mind thinking, it shows that there's a positive continuum in human nature and existence that we are the inheritance of.
I want to come to one more question, and then we're going to come to all of yours. So please start chatting them in if you have them. Professor Wray, there are these big issues that we're confronting as a society. I think of climate, I think of AI, and the many ways in which it's disrupting and enriching society. I think of the modern economy and its productivity and simultaneous inequities. How do you think that world wisdom literature can help individuals to lead more thoughtfully in a time of such complexity and where these issues are so kind of broad in scope?
What a question. What a question. Well, on the one hand, I mean, it is the case that there are a few recent Nobel Prize winners who attribute their discoveries in part to having combed ancient wisdom literature, usually Asian wisdom literature. That having been said, I think that the things that these texts have to offer really, as Daniel, David, and Kara have described, is an opportunity for self-cultivation and cultivation of the quality of attention. That more than anything else.
And in that process, you can think better about any of these issues because you're not just in a box in terms of how you understand and maybe examine them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as Kara, as you were saying, cultivating myself, pursuing something that I find interesting for its own sake turns out, maybe paradoxically, to make me better at addressing the interpersonal and interrelated concerns of my life and the life of all the communities that I'm in.
I'm going to come now to the chat, and this maybe is for everyone in terms of your philosophers, but David, I'll start with you. We have a question: which female philosophers do you recommend? I imagine that is, in part observation that it was primarily male philosophers mentioned. Can you talk about how you thought about the diversity of lived experiences of the people contributing these voices, with an acknowledgement, obviously, that much of the written word at certain points in time, and much of this is ancient, is not equitable in terms of who is written down and who's not. But yeah, let me let you answer that question.
Yeah, it's a great question. And of course, since I'm a classicist, I teach a lot of courses where all the texts are male authored. That is the case. One of the texts that we read this quarter, it's a book that I really love. It's called The Hidden Lamp. It's a book edited by two Soto Zen Buddhist priests, both women, and it's stories, anecdotes of Buddhist teachers over more than two millennia, and then there are comments by current Buddhist practitioners. So the book has many different authors, all female voices. So I was very happy that we had the opportunity to include those. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we had texts authored by women that were comparable to Confucius, Lao Tzu, Zhuangzi, things like that? From most of those times and places, we don't. There are exceptions, but I was glad that I was able to include that text.
Any other comments from the panel?
Yeah, I just want to dovetail on what David said. We talk about Sun Tzu, Art of War. You guys can see it. The actual translator, is actually a woman. So we did cover that aspect of things, acknowledge the fact that most philosophy of ancient times were written by men, but the current books we covered in the class were translated by women, as David aptly mentioned. So there was that yin and yang discussion and so forth about feminine and masculine, because we live in a very holistic society where we have to include both sexes and so forth. So we want to ensure the fact that everyone's ideas are covered, even if they're translating the ideas of ancient philosophers.
We have another question that was privately chatted to me about what you see in terms of the value of liberal education. And I'll just pull it up here. What do you think is the role of this type of education in a world that is increasingly focused on pre-professional education? In other words, why is liberal education still important to us as a society? Thoughts?
I'm happy to take that, and I can take a small slice of that. In that, my day job is hiring people and bringing world-class talent into the organizations that I'm building. And what I can tell you is, while I totally understand there are people that have a passion in STEM and there are people that have a passion in other areas, and they should develop that. And I hire many people with those backgrounds. By the time you get to higher levels of an organization or want to move into a leadership role, or even I've seen really amazing individual contributors that have moved along their career path, there comes a point where the questions aren't transactional anymore. The questions are really sort of open sky. They're harder. And especially in the world that we're in, where there's so much change and so many challenges that we face as professionals. As mentioned, this is part of the reason I wanted to return to a liberal arts perspective, because the frameworks don't work when you're in the middle of a global pandemic anymore, because they weren't built for global pandemics. But guess what? There's many people, Marcus Aurelius included, who has been through a global pandemic and actually had frameworks and developed a perspective that helped him transcend as a leader. I find that reaching deeper and going broader in the liberal arts perspective has helped me think about the tactical pieces of my day job better, and just also with the existential anxiety that all of us face when going into a job where we know we're going to be asked to do things that they haven't taught us in school. It's nice to go and know and have the confidence. I think a lot of what we're talking about today is gaining a foundation, gaining some confidence and credibility based on some of these foundational thoughts. I find that to be something that's really important as well.
Thank you, Kara. That was an almost intimidatingly brilliant answer, because now I'm looking at the rest of the panel and seeing what to add. But David, you are next.
Yeah, so I've taken some Big Bad Poet, some versions of the Apocalypse, World of Wisdom. I'm currently taking Science to Climate. Next quarter, I'm taking Neurobiology and Models of the Universe. For me, that was the reason why I came to University of Chicago. You get a chance to explore your hidden talents. That's not standard in your standard MBA course, your health administration course. Some things I've done already. The fact that you can take a deep dive into a subject area where you have limited experience allows for the creativity of your imagination to thrive. Steve Jobs always told me the fact he went to Wray College and learned calligraphy, hence the build of the iPod. And for me, that's always in the back of my mind. Creativity is an essential construct of the human condition. And the MLA program helps you to create. I haven't written the papers yet. I've only written creative papers. For example, in some version of Apocalypse, I wrote about a dual apocalypse happening, something I would never have done if I had not come to this program. And I already spoke about the work I'll be doing for World of Wisdom. So you get a chance to explore hidden talents you didn't think you had. And I tie into Kara. When you're having interviews at the highest levels, you've got to have an agile mind. A lot of people are very technically gifted, but they're not spatially gifted. The thing about the MLA program, it allows you to develop your spatial gifts and be agile in your understanding and your expression and your communication. And that's why I value this course.
Beautifully said. I'm thinking back to that passage, David, you read earlier, led by mind. And how do you sharpen your mind? Not just your skills, right? But the capacity of your mind to absorb, to create, to innovate. Daniel, can we come to you?
Yes, I would just mention people are people, and working with people it requires a certain level of cultivation, as Professor Wray mentioned. When I think about self-cultivation, I think of the liberal arts to help us engage one another well, and I think that is sorely needed in our society that is increasingly polarized and unable to speak to one another on matters of great importance that affect us all. And so when I think about the future of our country and ways of moving forward, I think of the skill sets that I associate with what the liberal arts are trying to do in terms of cultivation.
David, final comments? Professor Wray, I should say, just for.
I mean, I'm accustomed to being called David in all contexts. There was a question that just appeared in chat, and I think that what I'm thinking of saying kind of fits that question. The question is about liberal studies for those no longer in the workforce. Something that Cicero says about these arts, about how they go with us everywhere. There's no moment that we can't bring them with us. They, if we go on a trip, they accompany us, and they accompany us through all the stages of life. One of the things that I think that liberal studies gives us is the highest sense of cosmopolitanism, which it's a term that these Greek philosophers arrived at, and it means citizen of the world, or really it means citizen of the universe. So reading through these texts, in a way, we become sharers in a community or communities that stretch across vast expanses of space and time. It's invigorating, and in some way, it creates a sense of buoyancy, of sort of being somehow supported and uplifted by everything that has gone before us. Something like that.
Well, so we are coming to the end of
Can I
our.
add to his point?
Please go for it, David.
I think for those who are outside the workforce, I talked about the fact that I built creative writing skills. If you've had any aspiration to be an author or write about a great idea, I think this MLA, Master Liberal Arts, or any kind of liberal arts studies is very, very motivating and empowering. So that's the kind of thing you would get out of these kind of programs, because it teaches you how to think in a new and innovative way versus how you thought before.
Well, so I know we're coming to our time. I want to ask a final question, which is one takeaway you have from one another. I think one of the aspects of these classrooms is how much you learn from each other in those rooms. And so, Professor Wray, I'm curious, maybe a takeaway you've had from a student. And then for Kara, Daniel, and David, you obviously love your professor, but how have you learned something from another student or peer in this class and hearing about their experiences? And so we'll make this one popcorn. You'll pop when you're ready, and so you'll determine the order in which you share these final remarks. Although you'll have to be off mute to do that, so we'll see who unmutes first. All right, well, I will cold call. Professor Wray, I'm going to cold call you just because it's the easiest one.
Look, I'll just say that every week has been such an amazing surprise. We do a round of discussion posts before every class, and part of what I want to know is what people liked and didn't like, and it's so amazingly unpredictable. I have learned new things about how to read each one of the texts. I know that's a general answer, but that's what I've got.
Kara, I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to this. When we've gone into specifically the Taoism and Confucianism, I've had the benefit of being in discussion group with one of our classmates named Joe, and Joe sits in China and has and we have another colleague who Alice, who's Korean, and Priya, who comes from a Hindu background. So I'm able to sit there, and Joe's reading these things in Mandarin or in Chinese, right? So he's like, well, this word meant this, and we're able to like dig in a little bit, and then he's able to contextualize like how he was taught it and how he's learning it. So it's been super interesting for me. And similarly, they're asking, you know, it's a back and forth related to all of it. But to me, that cultural context of having people from different perspectives that have like lived and breathed some of this wisdom literature since they were 2 years old, super fascinating to me.
That is extraordinary. So this is a world wisdom literature course with a world of students, and you know, you're able to benefit from that incredible diversity. Daniel?
Yeah, I appreciate very much the way that we engage in our discussions. It's not necessarily one particular moment, but in my experience in this program, I just enjoy very much that we gather together around texts and that we work through it. We take the time to read them carefully and to explore from our various perspectives and experiences, and we can have one take, and then another person can have the opposite take, and in that mixture we can learn something. And it's just I just enjoy very much hearing from my colleagues when they have a different approach than I have, and yet it makes sense to me why they do. I'm constantly learning from them. So I really like this collaborative approach to education. It's very enjoyable.
David, do you have our final word?
Yeah, so Kara took my joke story, so I'm just gonna say the fact that we all come from different walks of life, and I think we all can attest to that. There's a reason why we're sitting in this audience, and with the audience outside, you know, the folks listening in. But I think we want also to learn. We know there's something in us, the desire to learn more, and that is what is expressed in the World of Wisdom class, the desire to learn more. We have our frameworks, but we all want to step outside our frameworks and find new frameworks, because that is the essential aspect of an MLA or a liberal arts study. And the fact that I can, you know, I know when you called on Kara, myself, and Daniel, we immediately said, yes, we're going to come on board, is because we understand this is a learning endeavor, and we want to help others learn and grow in their own future and in their jobs and in their own, you know, personal self-actualization and living up to their potential.
Well, I'll close with this. I remember the first conversation I had with Tim Murphy, the director of our MLA, as I was coming in as dean a year and a half ago. And I asked, you know, what difference does this make in the lives of students? And he said, you know, better thinkers, better listeners, better communicators. And I remembered immediately thinking, better leaders. And, you know, you think back to the text that you introduced, David, and what they're really saying, right? Leadership is about connecting in a human way. It's about listening deeply. It's about thinking creatively. And it's about ultimately coming to a place where you have an idea and then you can communicate it and move others because you've listened to them, because you've thought deeply behind that idea. And all of you are just incredible role models for that type of liberal education, allowing you to lead in a smarter and deeper way. And so I introduced this by saying we were going to talk about a program that is the jewel of the university, and you lived up to that very high claim to be a jewel at a university as great as ours. So thank you, David, for bringing the world to our classroom, and Kara, David, and Daniel, thank you for showing how it can really help to inform us as citizens, as leaders, and as people. And thank you all for joining us for this wonderful discussion. What a joyful way to spend a Wednesday or Thursday evening. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.